So I'm sitting here on a Saturday, December 10th, 2022, before the final, week 14 of the NFL season, and I'm talking fantasy football season long because I'm in a $10,000 buy-in tournament, and if I win and two other guys lose, then I make it into the playoffs for a chance to win 60K. And I thought it would behoove many horse players who follow me on Twitter at Raw or Die, because I love vegetables, and I think the more vegetables you live, the longer you'll live. They might be interested in hearing a little bit more about the parallels between season-long fantasy football tournaments and horse racing tournaments. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Christian Helmers, and I have earned the most in the U.S. on U.S. horse racing cash tournaments. Roughly $2 million over 30 tournaments, first, second, or third. Probably entered, I don't know, 200-300 now. And so my strike record is pretty good. Take it very serious. I love it. I love to compete. I love to use critical thinking to make decisions around money and basically trying to find ways to find hidden value. And in fantasy football, season long, I believe there's a much different animal than daily fantasy. So I don't play daily fantasy, but I did enter several fantasy football season-long tournaments this year. I have about 6 teams. I entered, like I said, a $10,000 buy-in for the High Stakes Society put on by the FFPC. So if you're not familiar with FFPC, they put together a really rad platform for season-long players. The way that their teams work, which I love, is that they do 20 rounds of drafting, which can sound a lot for people. So this isn't for everyone, but if you are a serious player and you like to make money at things like this, I do think you need to have that kind of a depth to your team, so that you have the ability to choose players in later rounds that could be very beneficial, and you don't just rely on the waiver wire to solve all your problems when you're in these small leagues and these home leagues with 10, 12 guys. Like, it just doesn't require as much skill, in my opinion, because everyone has got a good player. But anyway, I entered, 2 FFPC main events that are 2,000 each. And then I entered the 10,000 High Society, which is only 12 players. And I flew in from Burning Man to Vegas to go for a live draft, which is the first time I've done that, which I really enjoyed, kind of getting to see some of the guys I'm going up against. And then I also entered 2 football guys teams that are a couple $100. And I also got invited to the Pros versus Joes, put on by Darren at Fantasy Mojo, who puts together some of the best data in all of fantasy football. So if you haven't been to fantasymojo.com, check it out, because he definitely knows what he's doing in helping us understand where players are drafted and what players' values are and so forth. So really, this video is intended for serious fantasy players or fantasy season-long players. I'd like to share some of my strategies for my year. I've done fairly well. The first year I attempted to do this was 3 years ago. I've been playing fantasy for a while, but not at this level. And 3 years ago, I entered the FFPC main event, and I finished 15th out of 3,000 something, and earned a little under 20,000. It was a pretty big accomplishment, and I was consulting with my friend John Hurd. He and I drafted the team that year, and it was a pretty rad experience, especially first time. But I will tell you, it was, we drafted phenomenally well. For those of you that can remember that year, we did have Kelsey. We did have guys like Robbie Anderson and Corey Davis and Stephon Diggs. And then I think what saved us was some pickups of Myles Gaskin and J.D. McKissick. But nonetheless, we finished 15th. We were only 3 decisions away from $500,000. So it really lit a fire in me. And then it was 3 decisions that easily could have gone the other way in the remaining games. So I know it's attainable to win these tournaments based on the way I do things. And then last year we did not make the playoffs. We did have Cooper Kupp, and we had some other good guys, but we ended up missing the playoffs by 3 points in that windy New England Buffalo game. I don't know if you remember, but Tyler Bass missed a field goal, so that ended up costing me about 15 or 20 grand. Otherwise, I would have finished again in the top 20 Finished third in the consolation that year, and the name of our team is 11. John is huge into that number and its numerology, whereas I just think Stranger Things is kind of cool, and the powers of 11 are pretty magical. So anyway, the point is, I take it serious. I've done pretty well. So here I am this year. I just thought it'd be fun to share a little bit about what I did to all the top players. I think it's kind of fun to hear from inside the minds of the top guys, or people that are spending a lot of money on it. And I spent about $15K this year. And I did that because I felt like if I'm going to put this much time into it, I want to have a chance to win at least 50 or 60K in a small league. If not, $500,000 or $1 million. But I am going for $500,000 or $1 million. That's the reason I play these things. I don't want to finish in the top 20 or 30. I actually want to win it. And so I devise strategies that will take me there. And in order to do that, you got to be different. So I think one of the major themes of what I do in my fantasy stuff is to zig whenever other people are zagging, but not out of bounds. So I think the first place I would start is that I take a stand against 90% of other players or other, available drafted players in fantasy football. So just because a player is floating around at, in the 15th, let's say like in position 15 in the second round, if there's a guy that was normally taken in the ninth position that's floating around at 15, that doesn't mean I'm going to take him. I don't. I have my own value system, my own line of the players, but I walk away from most of them. And there's a lot of rationale behind that, but I do assign numbers to each of the guys, and I use some of my mathematical modeling stuff, but it's nothing too fancy. Obviously, it's not my forte. I don't specialize in this, but I've been able to come up with ways of projecting things. And I think that's wonderful because you can go back and track how you did. So if you don't have a number on guys and you can't see at the end of the year what you projected and how you did, otherwise you're just going to be, telling yourself you're doing better than you are. And I think one thing about horse players is if they don't keep records, they don't really know how profitable they are or how they're unprofitable. And it's taken me a long time to become profitable, and I've been betting on horses for over 10 years now successfully, and it's changed my life. And I think when it comes to fantasy football, I want to be at the top level, and I know I can compete with these guys. And so when it comes to other strategies, I would like to go into what I did for all 6 of my teams, and then I can break it down into the $10,000 league to give you guys some insights on that, in hopes of other people sharing a little bit about what they did too, because I think it's really fun to hear what some of the top guys are doing. This is a really competitive level of play. Some of the guys I know will buy hundreds of thousands of dollars of teams. maybe not that much, maybe like 50 grand or so. They'll buy 10, 20 teams, whereas I'll spend, six teams is enough for me. And so with that in mind, I took a stand against quarterbacks that are below the the 6th round, 7th round this year. I took only top 5 quarterbacks. So when I look at the way I drafted, I'm going to kind of score myself as I go through what I did this year with my 6 teams. I stayed convicted on quarterbacks in rounds 3 through 6. I didn't go later than that unless it was a backup. And so I chose guys like, it was the main guys were Herbert and Allen and Hurts. And so Herbert has been a little challenging given the injuries to Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, but his own ribs also had a factor of that. But anyway, it was a little difficult with him this year, but there's still time for him to perform the end of the season in the playoffs. But Josh Allen was a good choice. But I had to take these guys early, right? Josh Allen I had to take in the 3rd or 4th round, and then Herbert I took in the 5th or 6th, and then Hurts in the 7th. But I took a stand there. So there weren't any other quarterbacks I wanted. And so that's evidence of, I think, again, in this case, it worked out, but I'll share with you in other positions it didn't. But I liked staying convicted on those guys because of my analysis and so forth. So in doing so, I had more room later to draft other guys. And so The only other guy I took was Tom Brady as backups in the 11th and 12th, but I didn't want to bank on him. And then when it comes to the reason I chose to take those guys, it was really based on the fact that the age and the volatility and the changes in uncertainty in coaching. It was too risky for me. So that's ultimately why I did that. And I think Mahomes was a guy I was neutral on. I just didn't pull the trigger based on I thought that Herbert was going to have like a better year. So I'll kind of score myself against that one because obviously Kelsey and Mahomes is a great stack this year. But going back to my other decisions were the running back position I thought was really important to take running back in the first 2 rounds. So I did that for all 6 of my teams. I took McCaffrey, obviously in the first 2 if you had that draft position, then Eckler and Henry. On one team I took Swift in the first round, which I'll get into later, but I didn't want anybody else in the first round. I walked away from Saquon Barkley, which in hindsight was an error. I just didn't feel like the offense nor the coaching nor the injury history was in alignment with some of my other stuff, and I was wrong there. But and then in round 2, I took Aaron Jones on 4 teams, and I took Dalvin Cook and Swift on 2 others. So overall, but those are the only running backs I chose. So I wanted to kind of walk you through again just the strategy of being convicted and just taking the guys that you want no matter what, and not being afraid to say no, even if somebody has a higher ADP and you're in a position where you feel like there's value. But again, this is all based on historical data, so you're trying to look at where you've been right and wrong in the past to know that you can actually take those stands. And obviously sometimes, you can only be right so much of the time. It's just like horse racing, horse, even the most favored horse is only going to win a third of the time. So you have to, just like baseball, the best hitters aren't going to really break 330. So you have to realize that there's some, room for error. But anyway, the reason I did running back this year was because I thought it was really difficult to assess the guys 3 through 7, or rounds 3 through 7, the guys in those rounds. It was just too tough, too many question marks and the dead zone, of course, but which I don't mind always, but this year I didn't really care for those guys. So when I assess risk, I'm always trying to find hidden value, like not obvious value. So I didn't have anybody that stood out in those rounds. Now clearly Dameon Pierce was, and maybe even Kenneth Walker, you would say too. Those guys were, they're hard for me to take given the offenses that they're in, and I just wasn't a believer in Geno Smith this year, so I could never have had him. But in hindsight, Penny was very injury prone, as we know, and so I think the mistakes made in those first 2 rounds were guys like Barkley, I mentioned, Etienne, Josh Jacobs, of course, but he was just too tough for me given the the new coach and the guy who was bringing in Abdullah and Bolden, and just the fact that guy played in the preseason too is a little strange to me. So I couldn't swallow Josh Jacobs this year, even though he was on a contract season. But I was wrong on Nick Chubb, and I didn't have anything against him. It was just I thought it'd be better to take a tight end in the third round, which I'll get into in a second. So with regard to the later rounds, I did have to have backup running backs. So I felt like if I take those guys I mentioned early and I go into backups, I chose to take Tony Pollard and Kareem Hunt as my 2 main backups, along with James Cook and Naheem Hines. So those are guys I pretty much keyed on all my teams as well. So by going running back, I had a lot of room between the rounds 3 through 7 and 8, and then I would start looking at Cook and Hunt, and then go to Pollard if I could get him, given the wide receivers that were available that I liked. So anyway, I made also a mistake on Jamal Williams because I didn't expect him to poach as many touchdowns, and Swift let me down, but he's a phenomenal player, but he got hurt, and it is what it is, but I'm not making excuses. Anyway, so I think the key strategy this year for me to try to be different as well, because when I'm going to try to win something like this, I need to do something fairly dramatically different, and that was taking a wide receiver, my first wide receiver in round 5 or later. So for me, I didn't want any wide receiver in the first 4 rounds under any circumstance. And I know there's nothing wrong with Cooper Kupp or Justin Jefferson, Diggs. All these guys are great. I just didn't want those guys then when I thought I could get higher upside on wide receivers later. So to me this year, my early guys were Amon St. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Brandon Cooks. And then a little bit later, I focused on Adam Thielen, Kadarius Toney, Olave, and Rondale Moore. So when you hear those names, you probably are laughing and saying, you don't know what you're doing. And this year it was a big slap in the face because I did not expect Toney to be injured this much of the season nor more, even though I know his injury history and the way he runs is a bit lends himself to those injuries. But anyway, I chose Toney over Olave and pretty much all my teams. So I have Toney on all my teams. And that's a tough one to swallow. And then Cooks, as you know, with his whole situation has been a disaster and not being traded and his attitude. So errors kind of there. Mon was a good call. Olave was a good call. And then later I chose guys like Tyler Boyd, Myers. I had Myers on every team. Paris Campbell, Dobbs. And so I did okay overall. I think it was the right strategy still, because like I said, I couldn't identify guys like Kenneth Walker and Chubb and Pierce. It was just, and I mean, Breece Hall, I kind of had my eye on, but it was just too risky again in that offense. So the errors in the wide receiver this year were taking a stand against Miami's offense. I just didn't really feel that Tua was going to be able to do this with this new coach. I didn't think it would be this rapid improvement. And I also didn't expect Geno Smith to do the unthinkable. And so I just have to own that and accept it. But anyway, otherwise, like, I think it was a fine strategy, but it didn't deliver. So when you go back to the tight end position now, I think this was a big one for me as well that kind of worked against me a bit. I chose Waller and Schultz as my two guys this year. Couldn't take Kelsey because I needed the running back early and didn't really have an opportunity to in a lot of leagues anyway. But yeah, it was all about Waller and Schultz, and I think that given Devontae Adams' presence, I thought Waller would get a lot of looks in the end zone, and he just got hurt, and it's the new system, and then Jacobs took over. So it was a strange year for the Raiders, but I was wrong there. And then I still think I was fairly right on Schultz. He just didn't have Dak for a while, and then he was banged up. But we'll see what happens at the end of the playoffs now. But those two guys were pretty much taken on all my teams. Not always 3-4, but in the high stakes society one, the $10,000 one, I took Waller with the 3 and then Schultz with the 4, and I'll get into my draft in that one in a minute. But anyway, again, these tight end leagues in the FFPC require 1.5 point per reception. So you got to, keep in mind, do you want to play the roulette game with tight end later, or do you want to take a guy that's more reliable early? And this year, I wanted to take a guy that was more reliable. I just didn't have the ability to discern who was going to be really trustworthy later. There was too many things that were messy for me. So, and I wanted to play them both. Actually, I wanted to play Waller and Schultz, as flex, like one of the guys as a flex, and I just couldn't this year. So, took it on the chin a little bit there. But anyway, to kind of recap what happened this year, in the $10,000 league, I am waiting till tomorrow to decide who to get for my final player. And I have 6 or 7 guys that are injured right now, including Waller or on bye weeks. Like, I have Aaron Jones, and I have Rondale Moore, and let's see who else is not being played this week. Kadarius Toney, of course, and Brandon Cooks. He's been such a letdown. So it's been hard to swallow when I had, I think, a decent drafting strategy. But anyway, I'm sitting in 8th place right now. They take the top 6. It's all based on victory points. And I think that's the best scoring when you're playing in these high-stakes leagues. 12 people, $10,000 each. You score it based on whoever wins your matchup. It's 2 points. And then if you finish in the top 4 point scorers of that week, you get an extra point. And if you finish in the points of the standings of 5th through 8th, you get a point too. And if you finish in the bottom 4, you get 0. So anyway, you take the accumulation of those points and you see where you stand in the playoffs for the high stakes. They take the top 6 teams, and I'm sitting there in 8th, only like 1 or 2 points out of the 6th spot. So we'll see what happens this week. I'm praying to the fantasy football gods tonight that I can win and the 2 other guys can lose, because if I win and 2 other teams lose, then I'm in. But there's a lot that's gonna need to come together for that, but I'm pumped. I'm confident that I can do it. So I'll keep you guys posted if I do, or you can always follow me on Twitter at rawortdie, RAWORTDIE, I mean, and you can find out. But I don't usually post too much. Every once in a while I'll do a video like this just because, I don't know, I just felt kind of pumped up about the hard, long year it was and the ridiculousness of the season. I've never seen this many injuries. I've never had like 5 or 6 guys pretty much gone out of my team every week, and most of which were drafted in the top 10, but no complaints because that's the game, and that's the skill it takes to try to find guys that don't get injured. But anyway, the other recaps of my teams so far in the main event, I had 2 teams that I spent $2,000 on each. I finished 3rd in one of them, so I won't make the playoffs. In the main event, you got to finish in the top 2 in points or in the standings. So I finished in 3rd, so I won't miss that one. And just tough. I had some weird things happen, but I'm not going to make excuses. And then in the Football Guys Championship, I finished 3rd as well in one team. And then unfortunately, I missed the playoffs by 1 point, and I had double zeros with Rondale Moore and Kadarius Toney 1 week, and I just needed 1 point, and that would have got me into the playoffs, and I'd be going up in this week again to see how I could do against 10,000 people. But that didn't happen. So a 3rd in the Football Guys, and then finished in the middle in the other one, and then a 3rd in the main event, and then finished in the middle in the other one. So out of those 4, nothing really to write home about. So then we got the Pros versus Joes that I got invited to with John Hurd, and in that tournament, spent a lot of time drafting early and put together a really good draft. And so I'm finishing right now. I'm in 2nd place within like 20 points of the leader, and I think we'll catch him. Looks pretty good. Our team's pretty strong. His is as well, but I think we'll get him. And the winner of that gets $2,000 or a main event entry for next year. And those Pros versus Joes is put on by this guy Darren, who does the FantasyMojo.com data site for all the high stakes players. He created this where it's basically the top. I don't know. There's I think 4 or 5 teams, and there's like half the in my league. There's like six guys that are known in the industry as fantasy football enthusiasts or professionals, and then there's 6 other people that are up and comers. So because we finished 15th 3 years ago in the main event our first year, and then finished 3rd in the consolation last year, they invited us into it, or we won some kind of lottery to get in. So that's exciting. So I'm pumped about that, but I'm really just keeping my fingers crossed about tomorrow, because my team is, let me just walk you through it real quick. And I know I'm probably talking too much, but I think it's kind of exciting to kind of think about these things, and I can post a couple other screenshots of the draft and other things in the YouTube video. But anyway, I have Herbert, I think he's going to start coming on now that Mike Williams is back with Keenan, but it's been a struggle without those guys both being on the field. And then I've got Swift, and then I've got James Cook, and like I said, Swift and Cook were these guys I had on a lot of my teams. Tyler Boyd, who's a little tricky right now, and then I've got Schultz, Kareem Hunt, and Foreman, and Dallas's defense who I picked up. So those are the guys I'm rooting for this week, tomorrow, week 14. I've got so many guys on the bench right now, and that should be playing, like Tony and Moore and Cooks, and Aaron Jones has got to buy, but that's the game. So lessons learned this year were, ultimately just be a little more careful with injury prone players. I liked being convicted. I looked at my draft many a times. It was crazy because in the high society draft, when I flew into Vegas, they literally, I didn't even realize this, they give you a card. Balky gave each of us a card, and I drew number 4, which means I get to pick my draft slot. I was the 4th person to pick. So, 1 and 2 were gone and 6 was gone. And so I drafted 8th. And in choosing 8, the reason I chose 8 is because I wanted Derrick Henry. I didn't think anybody would take him because there was a lot of kind of like, there's a lot of people were negative on him. I just thought he was reliable. I didn't really want to be in the front 4 slots because of the guys that were available later. And I wanted to be on the back end of the draft this year. And so I got, Aaron Jones, of course, in round 2, and then Waller a little early, needed to take him because I knew he probably wouldn't be there in the 4th round. And then I took Schultz. So I went tight end in rounds 3 and 4 because I really wanted to force some of the guys to have to struggle with the tight end position. And I didn't have, like, again, a strong opinion on wide receivers in rounds 3 through 4. I thought they were fine, but I just didn't love anybody. I thought the value was later with guys like Myers and Rondale Moore and Tony and Olave and Thielen. And unfortunately, I was right and wrong. But Tony's been the biggest thorn in my ass. But anyway, so in hindsight, I would say that I'd encourage everyone to think through, who worked for you this year. Where were you wrong and right? If you can put numbers to it, that'll be really insightful. And I think if you're going to try to win these things, because I've had success in the horses and stuff, I think you have to be different. So, some people go 0 RB, some people go, 0 wide receiver, or whatever you want to do. I think just track it, see how you're doing, seeing how you're projecting. I thought it was really tough for me this year to get the top scoring wide receivers, in Miami and Seattle, just given the quarterback situations and the offenses. I just didn't believe. And so I stand by that decision. And those guys are, most likely league winner kind of guys, but the playoffs is the playoffs. Anything can happen. So we'll see what goes on. I'm pumped. I just wanted to, send a shout out to Sigmund Bloom and his team for all their hard work. I had the pleasure of meeting Sigmund a few years back at there was a fantasy football conference, and I just, I don't really listen to a lot of guys and nobody in horse racing. I just do the work myself, but in fantasy I needed, to hear some logic, and I give that guy a lot of respect. So if you see the Sigmund, I appreciate what you do. I appreciate the way you present yourself and you handle yourself, and you own your decisions, and you present your decisions well. And I don't think you're always right, nor would you think you're always right, because it's fucking fantasy football. But anyway, it's more like, the way that you walk through your logic is helpful, because then if I disagree with your logic, I can go a different way. I know you're a bit emotional, but we all get emotional when it comes to picking players. And I think that the entire team does a good job there. And other than that, I would say thank you to Darren for all he does with Fantasy Mojo. I wanted to give him a shout out, and the guys at the FFPC. I had a pleasure meeting Dave there, and I had the pleasure of meeting Farrell and Balky at the live draft. So I just wanted to shout out to you guys. Thanks for doing more videos. I think it's really interesting hearing the top guys talk. Not that I'm a top guy yet, but I take it serious, and I hope to compete against more of the top guys in big high stakes tournaments. I'm down to put $10,000 down, $20,000 down against the sharpest minds if we want to do a bigger one. I'm interested, and we'll see what happens tomorrow. I'll keep everybody posted, and I can post again the draft for what we did in the $10,000 league this year, and maybe I'll go on an interview with the guys at FFPC, depending on how things end up this year. But anyway, thanks a lot for listening, and to any of the guys out there that want to share, what they did this year. I think it's really interesting to hear from people who take it serious, and to own your mistakes, and to learn from your past and improve. So if you have any thoughts or ideas or suggestions, I'm here to learn, and I appreciate this game.